Okay. And we're just getting a request to that, if, as you look for other alternative programs to deal with the rental units, if you could report back to our committee,
Absolutely.
Staff, on those potential solutions that we hope to reach and find.
Absolutely. Be happy to.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Alan Sheet of Tulare County, we do have an issue with landlords not providing water to their tenants.
Right.
Be somewhere down the line, it's our responsibility in environmental health to make sure that the renter, the tenant, is getting the services that are beneficial to the safety and well-being of the tenant.
Right.
So somewhere down this road, the county's going to have to make a decision on, do we red tag these homes or not? So because of the emergency situation we're in at this point in time, we've been willing to let it slide. But if you were in a metropolitan area or whatever, you'd have a red tag on the door. So we're kind of sitting back watching what's happening, but unfortunately at the end it's going to be our decision if that building is habitable or not. So that's something we need to look at in the future.
All right. And you're absolutely right, County Supervisor, that it's certainly a health and safety issue, and I think that's why one of the previous witnesses had brought up that it's a real fear for parents, when, child welfare thinks, well, if there's no water in the home, there's no means to take a shower, really presents a real crisis. I mean, just being at the emergency shower location, I thought, it was kind of upsetting to see that people have to go outside their home and have some emergency set up for them to do something that's so private to somebody. It's people deserve dignity and respect, and when you see them have to endure that, it's one thing when it's after an earthquake or after a severe disaster for a few weeks, but when people have been doing this for months now, day in and day out, I can totally feel their frustration with that reality. But I want to thank you for your testimony, and we have one more panel before we open up for some last comments from other residents who wanted to share some thoughts. Our next panel. Oh, are we done? Oh, the water board, I'm sorry.
I was going to get off the hook.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You throw me under the bus now.
Darren was
Okay, you can have, everyone's out of seat to
I was
continue to
going
do
to
that.
bolt for the door, but...
I'm sorry, we have some questions for you as well. We have Darren Polemas, Deputy Director of the Division of Financial Assistance for the State Water Resource Control Board. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chairman Leo. I've tried to modify my, I'll couch it as well-written and smooth testimony, and now it's going to be kind of jerky around to try to work in what I've heard here, because it's been some great testimony gone on, and I think it's important to bring up those points. So I was asked to kind of present the long-term funding solution, which is really largely what the programs we've been given over the years have been set up to do. We really find ourselves in a unique situation trying to adapt those programs to this very emergency situation, and of course we're committed to do that work where we can, but we're always faced with how to adjust something that was never conceived in that type of environment, and how to meld it so that it works for the people of California now. And that's exactly what we want to do. So kind of also just another background comment is, of course, drinking water is a new part of the mission of the Water Board. The Drinking Water Division was moved from Department of Public Health to our group here as of July 1st of last year.
And we had a lot of discussions about that.
You did indeed. And I can tell you that it's exceeded my expectations on how smoothly that's went, even though it was a lot of work to pull that off. But I think we're seeing a lot of synergies. The financing group that was with that group, we've now merged that with our financing group at the State Water Board that was existing, and did a lot of experience with wastewater treatment and a lot of background there. And so now we're blending the good people from that were formerly with DPH and are now part of my staff that are working hard and blending those programs. And we're trying to find synergies. They're educating us every day on the challenges they faced and their unique programs, and I'm trying to bring some of our unique options to try to open it up and have some big thinking across the board that'll work good for everybody. So when we look at kind of the situation and again, in the light of the fact that our programs were really conceived outside of a crisis situation, and how do we meld those to deal with now? Kind of one of the first things that points I want to make is that our funding relies on a local entity, the city or the county or someone, to really prosecute the project. We're a funding agency, and we're a support role, and we can support them as best we can, but we really have no authorities to come in and take over for them in those roles. And so it's helping to prop them up is one of our goals as well. And we will do everything we can to make it as easy as we can for them, but having them on the ground locally, that's important for us, and they will be our partner as we move forward. A couple other things I want to mention that are also kind of mixed up with our funding programs, and that's they're really directed at the local agencies that would be our partners, and we can't oftentimes find ourselves where we can't fund for private individuals or like was talked about with the landlords of type of scenario. We have to give our money to local governments, is the way most of the laws are structured around the funding we have, and so that's a limitation we have. There's one kind of way around that a little bit that we've worked out, where we've conceived of it and we've tried it once and it wasn't very successful, so I'm not going to say it's a guarantee, but we can offer mini loan programs to an entity like a county, where we can seed them with money and then they can directly loan to individuals and then get it back. Part of the reason it's a problem is we really can't reimburse the counties for their administrative costs associated with running a program like that. So while I can capitalize it, I have a hard time, giving them the need they do. So we'll have to figure out some mechanism to see if we can work around that, if that actually works out to be a solution. So the funding programs we really have right now available to us are our Drinking Water SRF program. That's a federal program that we administer that's capitalized by federal funds. It's a low-interest loan program largely. It does have opportunity for zero-interest loan, or we have a limited amount each year of the federal cap grant that we can use for principal forgiveness in that program. But as you can imagine, that's highly competitive, and before the crisis of the drought, we always spent all of that every year with people that are queued up for that funds and have projects that are working their way through. And so we'll have to continue to look at how we're going to rearrange the priorities and stuff associated with the drought as we move forward. Also, everybody's looking to Prop 1. They know the bond passed, and we know the bond passed, and in the governor's budget we've proposed on actually kicking that money off and having local assistance available as soon as it's appropriated to us in a budget, assuming July 1, if not sooner. That funding, in anticipation of it, the Water Board is committed to working having actually staff dedicated to that to develop those programs, and so we're going to start per Prop 1 require us to hold public hearings before we can set up our criteria associated with that, and we will be holding those in March. We will try to get the guidelines for the distribution of that money to our board by June so that they can approve that, and so that as soon as assuming July 1, have a budget in place, then we can begin immediately working and dispersing Prop 1 funds and begin those projects. We are going to combine the programs so that our Drinking Water SRF program and our Prop 1 funds basically run together. Our idea is that people often self-select out of a program by trying to figure it out, and I don't want them to figure it out. I want them to tell me what their project is. They'll bring that to us. We have an online application system that we are pretty proud of that helps people apply, and then the local agencies can bring those projects to us, and we will then work out what the best possible financing arrangement we can make for those local entities will be. It'll be some component of Prop 1 based on those rules, some component of Drinking Water SRF for moving forward. So hopefully we can find a funding package that'll be appropriate. It was mentioned here there's some other programs that we've done. So the cleanup and abatement account, we've both had $2 million that was dedicated from our board under the existing cleanup and abatement account rules, and in the legislature in SB 103 last year, the emergency drought bill also gave us authorization for $4 million that relaxed some of the rules. It's our money, though, still had to be used for limited sets of circumstances where contamination or drought impacts were involved, and so we were able to give Tulare County some of that funding, and they've got several programs working with us now, and we're happy to see those moving ahead. They're mostly bottled water in those circumstances, but we've done some other instances where we've drilled wells and stuff like that, so we'll continue to look at that as a possibility. We also, in the emergency drought that came to us from CDPH, was the Public Water System Drought Emergency Response Grants Program, and that is, again, directed at community systems, and so it leaves places like East Porterville kind of in a lurch. We don't have a local entity there or a local water system that, that funding was directed at and can fund. And so we are requesting in the next budget another $15 million. This time, instead of general fund, it'll be we're requesting that it be reappropriated out of our cleanup and abatement account, and we can kind of give it a new set of rules so that it'll have a much broader ability to spend that money instead of the restrictions that are associated with there. I guess I would wrap up with kind of two main points. Overall infrastructure in California drinking water needs is $39 billion for the next 20 years. I think a circumstance that's as tragic as East Porterville and Porterville's situation really just kind of hint at that we're on the edge on a lot of our communities throughout the state of California. They were unfortunate enough to have circumstances that I think pushed them into crisis mode, but there's many, many other small ones that we know of that are on this edge. Tulare County has many of those that we're already working with to try to see if we can't keep them from getting to that stage, but that's a huge need that the state faces, and so $520 million sounds like a lot of money until you compare it against the overall need. And then I guess finally, most of our programs, well, all our programs are really there to provide capital investment, the initial project, but before we provide capital, we need to look at whether the community can actually afford to, even if we can give them a 100% grant, can they afford to operate a facility afterwards? And when we get into a lot of our facilities now where we're treating for nitrates and perchlorate and some of the other contaminants, we're seeing very high treatment costs associated with that. This is groundwater that didn't used to have to be treated, and so there is a lurking question out there about that. I kind of use a rule of thumb that you can basically multiply by 4 whatever the capital costs were, and that's the cost of the community over that 20-year life of that project, and those are substantial costs. So we've been very adamant about insisting on that the problem is not solved when we come in and build a capital project, that many of these problems continue to persist, and so that we're going to need to work with the legislature, and the administration is looking forward to that to try to figure out ways to provide funding that's this missing gap associated with where it's unaffordable.
Right. And I certainly, my staff and this committee and my colleagues want to continue to work with you to see how we could, some of those ideas that you just mentioned here, potential resources to try to see it, to follow through and see how we could plug those in. But just to go back to the safe and drinking water aspect of the water bond, the $520 million, just to get your thoughts on whether you anticipate some of that will go to East Porterville. Just to be clear, as people are anticipating, I mean, that was probably one of the most important and more supportive parts by the people of California in passing a bond, is addressing this issue, ensuring every California has safe and clean drinking water. I know, regs and guidelines are coming out as different parts of the bond roll out. What do you see in terms of perhaps East Porterville benefiting from part of those funds?
Yeah, I would get myself in trouble if I were to commit, now that we could make funding available, preconceiving what my board's going to set as the rules associated with that, and also the public input we want to get associated with that. I can say that obviously a situation like East Porterville is on our mind as we look at the criteria that we're establishing, and how that would factor into the situation. But I really can't jump ahead of that.
When will those regs and guidelines when will they become completed, and by when can like Tulare County or City of Porterville look to apply for those funds?
Right. So they can apply now if they wanted to. They would, like I said, they would apply through our online application system for our SRF program, but as the funds become available, we'll bleed those in. So it's not like they're going to have to reapply. So that's open to them now. Obviously, we can't provide the Prop 1 funds. They're not appropriate to us. We don't have the program in place. But as you know, there's no project that happens in 10 days. And my colleagues up here, as you can see, are working hard associated with trying to get projects in place and the work needed to get those there. So from our standpoint, in March, we're going to have on the street our draft proposal of kind of straw man guidelines that we fully expect to take good comments on and modify. So I don't want anybody to think that what we put out there is anything other than our first kind of shot to start the conversation. We'll have those conversations very quickly, and then we suspect it, or our schedule is to take to our board for approval then a final set of guidelines for their adoption in June, so that we're ready as soon as appropriation happens in next year's fiscal budget.
And on Prop 1 also, how quickly will Prop 1 funds, the interaction with the state revolving fund, does that require the legislature to put funds into that and then get money out to communities in need? How do you see that work?
Yeah, no, so we'll be able to, obviously the Prop 1 funds are going to provide a grant, and so based on the criteria that we're going to establish, we're going to want to give a community that, especially like East Porterville, that needs as much assistance as possible, the grant, the maximum amount of grant that's allowed under whatever guidelines are adopted. From there, then there's, of course, some remaining component required that needs to be funded, and that's when we would look to offering our SRF loan funds. It could either be 0% interest or it could be low interest. Our standard loan is 1.66 for drinking water program right now, so it's a substantial subsidy as it is, but it could go down to 0 if that's the case. We also work with them with underfunding. We've worked with USDA to collaborate on funding, the iBank and the other funding sources, so it doesn't have to be our SRF either. They could take our Prop 1 and say, I've got a better deal from somebody else, or we've got some other grants that we want to mix in, and we're very versed at working with our partners on that to make sure that we can find the best funding solution overall for the community.
Well, thank you very much for your testimony. I think we got our county supervisors also part of the next panel, but thank you very much for coming and testifying. To keep things moving, we got our last panel here. Again, our supervisor, Ishida from Tulare County, and Denise England. And then we have Laurel Firestone and Deneen Jones. Laurel Firestone is with the Community Water Center. Deneen Jones is Deputy Drought Manager. And Tracy Billington, Chief of the Financial Assistance Branch of the California Department of Water Resources, DWR. And this panel will talk about the Tulare Lake Basin Disadvantaged Community Water Study. They're just going to give us an update on this study they've been working on over the last couple years. And then this will be the last panel, and then we'll open up for additional public comments from anyone wanting to share some additional thoughts. Who would like to go first?
That's what we were trying to figure out.
Okay.
We didn't set it.
I can go first. I'm happy to let you all go first. So, okay, thank you so much for convening this and this panel, and for spending so much time here listening to these issues and working with us to address them. You know, there's been a lot of drought talk and drought panels, but this is the first one I've seen where you've really prioritized hearing directly from the residents and communities and local leaders that are working every day to try and help their communities and struggling with the realities of really ground zero of this drought. This is the reality, and I think, you know, this body has committed to the human right to water in California, and it's now that we have to really make that a reality on the ground. We have been fortunate enough to be able to start to do some really significant planning through the leadership of Tulare County and through a appropriation back in 2008 that just finished a study looking at disadvantaged community drinking water and wastewater needs in the Tulare Lake Basin. This study found really that, as has been discussed here today, what you're hearing about East Porterville is really just one of many communities that are struggling. Unfortunately, this has been some of the most acute in recent year in this drought, and most number of concentrated well failures. But there's 530 unincorporated communities in the Tulare Lake Basin alone. Well, the vast majority are disadvantaged communities or severely disadvantaged communities. Of the 353 disadvantaged communities, only 56% had any water quality data available on the quality of water that they're drinking from public publicly available sources. 45% of those where it was available had water quality violations. So this is a widespread problem throughout the region. Additionally, and really important for the drought, 27% of the communities relied on a single well for the entire community water supply. So that means if anything happens to that well, whether contamination or loss of supply or capacity, the community is out of safe water. In addition, 62 communities had an unknown water source, which essentially in most cases means that they're not a regulated water system, that they rely, like East Porterville or Munson, on private wells or state smalls that are not regulated by the state and for which there's really no information available both on water quality and water supply in most cases. It's also important to note that 38 of the 38 disadvantaged communities that have their own wastewater treatment facility, 66% had discharge violations. So we're struggling a lot with drinking water and wastewater infrastructure and capacity in this region. One of the real benefits of this study was that it brought people together, a very large and diverse group of leaders together to start to coalesce around trying to proactively solve problems and create a regional plan for how we're going to address this issue. There was a stakeholder oversight advisory committee that included board of supervisors from all 4 counties, also water board members and community residents from all 4 counties, overseeing the study and really directing the decisions and priorities. Through that, there was also a lot of involvement from the state and federal funding agencies, local IRWM groups, nonprofits, technical assistance providers, and the group overall, the study identified over 59 specific recommendations for planning, infrastructure, and other management actions at the local level, regional level, and state level. They focused on ways to improve local technical, managerial, and financial capacity, ways to improve operations and maintenance funding, improve water supply quality and reliability, access to funding, improve disadvantaged community and community awareness and participation. I think one of the things that you heard today is that a lot more needs to be invested in outreach and just communications with local residents, and improving land use planning to minimize creation of more of these challenges in the future, and not proliferating the problems that we're seeing today. And developing and maintaining information on disadvantaged community water and wastewater needs. I want to focus on a few particular next steps and recommendations that were priorities coming out of the stakeholder group, and also talk a little bit about some of the particular next steps related to funding in particular that were focused at the legislature, since we have this time here with you all today. So overall, the priorities in particular from the Stakeholder Oversight Advisory Committee were, one, to really reconvene and continue to convene and expand the group of local stakeholders engaging and coordinating on these issues. You heard some of the benefits of coordination around drought response in the Porterville area, but there needs to be a lot more proactive and regular collaboration and convening of people across the county and across the multiple counties to figure out how to advance these solutions and really advance implementation of the recommendations. Investing in funding disadvantaged community coordinators, data coordination, funding assistance, and actively funding and facilitating and really incentivizing collaborative solutions. You heard a lot about that with collaboration with the City of Porterville today. Looking at in particular with the with the recommendations around the legislature, supporting the evaluation and development of regional entity or entities that can provide regional operations or management or other services for dispersed disadvantaged communities, establishing a transitional funding program to assist with O&M costs on a temporary basis, require and actively support investment of bringing current systems into compliance and developing long-term affordable solutions before expanding growth in other areas, and really requiring and water quality testing and water level testing and reporting, so that we can identify problems proactively before they get to the point that they are in East Porterville. I will say one of the things that really, this study concluded really just before the much of the hardest hits from the drought this summer. And so some of the drought funding recommendations didn't make it in because the study had sort of concluded before we'd had more experience with the drought. I want to just recommend that we really capitalize on this opportunity that we have with Prop 1, that we really strategically invest appropriately in accelerating the development of long-term solutions, focusing on having multidisciplinary technical assistance programs, and that we also make sure that there's real commitment and efforts and your leadership here in also re-upping on the drought relief. I think there was a huge amount of success in some of the funding that happened that we didn't talk a lot about today, but there was $15 million in general fund that was invested this past year in emergency capital projects that were really permanent solutions for communities. And the state board did an excellent job of getting that money out. As a result, communities like Seville have safe water for the first time in 10 years. And that turned around. They were able to expedite drilling a well for the community, the entire community, which included a school, in a matter of months. The community of Cameron Creek, which is a community of all private well owners, being able to connect to the city of Farmersville. I think these show that it can be done. It can be done quickly to expedite these solutions, and we need to make sure that there's an investment in the right kind of funding and the right kind of programs to get that out to really accelerate the long-term solutions. At the same time, we have to reduce the barriers for making sure people have interim and immediate access. It shouldn't be a year later, and people in East Porterville should not be. It's really unacceptable to have people still be relying on borrowing buckets from neighbors. This is really completely unacceptable, especially, given that there has been a commitment this past year of millions and millions of dollars, and we need to make sure that it's being used effectively, fixing some of the problems that we've learned from now, and expediting these processes. I just want to note there wasn't, our interpretation of the current budget proposal is that it does not include an additional general fund for continuation of that kind of emergency support for drinking water projects, and that kind of general fund flexibility is essential for being able to do more around do more successes like we had in Seville and Cameron Creek and some of those areas. So. Thank you very much.
And that information is helpful for us to see on what we did in the past and what good examples that really help communities. I remember visiting Seville, West Goshenman, and Cutler Rossi, but it's good to see that Seville, at least, it's a good example that hard work really paid off. But we do realize I'm not in that area all the time. That's why I'm glad Assemblyman Mathis and VIDAC are interested in following through, because that's their districts. They have more day-to-day contact, but we do rely on groups like all the ones that spoke here today to inform us about what's working, what we should keep helping, and what we need to improve on as well. For people at home, the study that we're talking about was a study done. It was approved by the legislature in 2008. $2 million were funded because Tulare Lake Basin was one of the worst, I think it was the worst area outside of my district, Salinas Valley, with the growing problem of nitrate contamination, water contamination in the state. Tulare Lake Basin covers Fresno, Kern, Kings, Tulare counties, and we're trying to get a report back of what has been done, with those resources, because this is another example that the work being done here is going to be used in other areas. In Salinas, for example, we're already moving towards doing the same, but looking at what all the stakeholders did in the Tulare Lake Basin, as we've had San Gerardo, San Lucas, and now San Vicente Mutual Water District are now dealing with nitrate contamination in the Salinas Valley. So next, who's going to be our next speaker?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Tracy Billington with the Department of Water Resources, and I'll keep my comments very brief. The funding for this study came from Proposition 84 out of the Integrated Regional Water Management Grant Program and part of the interregional funding that was available from Prop 84. And the department's main role was to provide the funding and assist the county and the group that was advancing the program, and we did provide some technical assistance and data and information, and the document is complete, and we're in the process of officially transmitting it to the legislature. You should, but you may already have it. So if you have any questions of me about our role or the funding we have, just keep it brief.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll hear from the county, then we'll have some more questions.
This is the result of the $2 million study. This is what I would call is our roadmap to the future on solving disadvantaged community water problems. What I like about this document and this study, none of it's boilerplate. This was all original work. So it was done by professionals. We contracted a lot of people who worked in the water, engineers and self-help enterprises, community water, different engineers. This is the most important thing that came out of it, because no one in the Tulare Lake Basin understood all the problems we had in our disadvantaged communities. As a supervisor, we would know what district, in our district, what little communities had problems. This one, we categorize the whole Tulare Lake Basin. You can go through this study and look at the communities, and you'll know what their water problem is. And what we want to do with this study is we want to go forward and prioritize certain projects that we can get accomplished in a short period of time. But the problem we found in getting these communities to get together to solve their problems is governance. It's very difficult for these communities to understand how important governance is to the project. And many of them have been really disenfranchised with the county and the state of California coming in previous years promising projects, and all of a sudden we pull out and say the funding had disappeared. Right. So we have a real credibility issue with a lot of these people. The one thing we have determined, though, is we have to go fund projects where the people are willing to take that governance on. We can't force a project on a group of people. We need to go where people really want to improve their water quality and they're willing to work toward that governance or manage the water project. I want to interject that Tulare County is one county that will not go in and start new community service districts. The reason we won't go in and start new community service districts under our jurisdiction is called Prop 218. We have community service districts now that we have not been able to raise the rates to cover the costs of those services for about 5 years, 4 or 5 years. So it's not prudent for us to create new ones. So that's where legislatively we may need some help and to motivate us or other groups to put in these projects and take ownership of the projects. The other important thing is when I say that we have lost credibility with a lot of these people, and a lot of people feel that they've been ignored, is we had a SOAP committee, and we've had public outreach. We need to go into these communities more often in the future, maybe 3 or 4 times more, so they can get the credibility, belief that something will happen, and they have faith in themselves of determining their own future. So it's extremely important, in my opinion, that we need funding for that community outreach. Because without that community support, they're not going to get the project. I hope you have a chance to look through this. I mean, it's mapped, it's so thorough that anybody can look at it and say, well, this community has this problem, or if funding comes up for a specific problem, we can go to this book and see what communities have those issues. So it's very complete. I was asked a question this morning about what does the ag industry think about disadvantaged community water, and what's the ag's position? Well, I can assure you the agriculture industry is totally behind helping these disadvantaged communities water issues, because those are the people we rely on in agriculture. They live there, and they're part of our industry. So we highly support whatever can be done in the disadvantaged communities to clean up their water and give them a way to dispose of their sewage. So that's basically, from my perspective as a supervisor, I'm very pleased with the product that was finalized.
Yeah.